Movie makers have been messing with Manhattan for ages, but the New York borough has never before been subjected to a disaster quite like the one in Prototype. In this action-packed open-world game, the military is doing what it can to contain a viral outbreak that's turning the island's population into mutants. You play as Alex Mercer, an amnesiac who isn't sure who or even what he is, as he tries to figure out what's going on and where he fits in the big picture. What Mercer lacks in memories, he more than makes up for with agility and superpowers. As a result, he's an incredibly fun character to play as, in a game that also counts an intriguing story, varied missions, and some memorable boss battles among its features. Making giant leaps, gliding through the air, and even running up the sides of skyscrapers is effortless in Prototype. No fall will ever hurt you, no obstacle is impassable, and there are very few enemies who can keep up with you at full clip. Combat is also relatively simple early on, but as you progress and learn more about who and what Mercer is, his repertoire of moves grows exponentially until remembering which button combinations trigger which moves actually becomes one of the more challenging aspects of the game. Regardless, combat in Prototype is a blast. Not only can you shapeshift into different forms that turn your arms into blades, a whip, and hammer-like fists, but you also have the option to use more conventional weapons dropped by enemies. And eventually, you can hijack tanks and helicopter gunships. The latter is especially fun, because you can use a whip-like arm to latch onto them in mid-air, even while falling from another helicopter that you've been shot down in. One benefit of having all of these options available to you, as well as the ability to disguise yourself as any character that you consume to regain health, is that many of the already varied story missions can be approached in a number of different ways.
Red crowd, sustained hostile. We got it. HQ, we got the hot target here. You wanted priority comm on then.
Authorization tag 00 Hotel. Priority strike package incoming. Over.
It's almost impossible to play Prototype without feeling like Mercer is an overpowered character at some point. But anytime you start getting too comfortable, there's a good chance that the game is about to change things up on you. To give specific examples would be to risk spoiling the game's story, but let's just say that new enemies and hazards are introduced, moves you've come to rely on might not always be available or effective, and as time passes, Manhattan becomes an increasingly perilous place to be. The difficulty curve is nigh on perfect, and the fact that you're continuously adding new moves to your arsenal to combat new dangers helps keep the gameplay from getting repetitive. Unfortunately, the same can't be said for the scenery. Save for a handful of landmarks like Central Park and Times Square, much of Prototype's Manhattan starts to look the same after a while, and because the whole island is yours to explore from the get-go, it never changes. With that said, moving around the island is so much fun as Mercer that you inevitably end up exploring anyway, and there are 200 glowing orbs to find hidden around the city that encourage you to do so. There are a number of other things to do outside of story missions as well. Optional timed and score-based challenges include checkpoint runs across rooftops, battles in which you're disguised as a soldier and can use only conventional weapons, helicopter strafing runs, and more. Perhaps the most interesting challenges are those in which you have a time limit in which to consume a number of highlighted pedestrians in different areas of the city. These pedestrians, of whom there are over 130 to find both during challenges and regular play, are special because they each have some knowledge of what's going on in Manhattan. And when you consume them, you're treated to a brief montage of their relevant memories.
I forgot something.
Few of these memories contain much information individually, but they're slickly presented, and unlocking a large number of them adds an extra dark layer to the occasionally predictable story that's well worth the effort.
Halt!
The camera isn't always up to the task of keeping up with the action automatically, especially when Mercer steps inside a relatively small or confined space. There's a great lock-on targeting system for keeping enemies in camera shot at all times though, and that's especially useful during boss fights. It can work against you occasionally though, because on a street crowded with civilians, infected and abandoned taxi cabs, hitting the lock-on button will almost always default to an inanimate object. That's great if you're looking for something to throw at a troublesome helicopter, but not very helpful if you have almost no health left and desperately need to consume some foes. Prototype is a truly brutal game when Mercer is on the warpath. Enemies will be cut in half horizontally, torn in half vertically, have holes punched clean through them, they'll be decapitated, skewered, and you can even use them as projectiles. And all the while, there's a plentiful supply of blood spilling onto the streets. The military chatter that you can hear at all times does an excellent job of reminding you that the trouble in Manhattan isn't always at Mercer's location. Mutants and the military can be played off against each other on occasion, and a quick look at the city map makes it easy for you to identify which neighborhoods are controlled by which group and which are still contested. Prototype isn't a game in which any one visual element is remarkable, but it looks good. And it's impressive that the frame rate holds up even when the number of characters and the amount of action on screen borders on insane. Furthermore, Mercer is brilliantly animated, which makes the parkour, the combat, the shape-shifting, and especially the gliding between rooftops all the more satisfying. And that's a word that can be used to describe almost every aspect of Prototype. There's no multiplayer component to keep you playing for weeks and months, but you're free to remain in Manhattan long after you've beaten the story. And if you prefer, you can play through it a second time and retain all of the powers that you already unlocked. Prototype's good enough that you'll probably want to do that. And even if you don't, there's more than enough fun to be had here for us to recommend this game without hesitation.
We have a red scenario.
Fire support overhead. Marines, see various targets. Can you laser the hostile